Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Kalayim, Perek Vav, Halacha Gimel, and Halacha Dalet. We're learning today Daf Nun Ches, Daf Noyach. We are mamish on top of the Amid, which is the middle of the Mishnah. The Mishnah, Halacha Gimel, began with the rule that we had on Daf Nun Zayin Amid Beis, that when a person is training vines on, let's say, a pergola, or on a barren tree, on a ilan Zajac, we already know that one may not plant foreign seeds under grapevines. We know that. But when you train grapevines on a pergola, it takes time for the vines to cover the entire pergola. So the covered part is usher to plant underneath it foreign seed. What about the moisar? What about the current remaining part of the pergola, the current other part of the branch that's not yet covered? The Mishnah says that midrabanan, you also already may not plant foreign seed under it. And the way we explained the Mishnah, as we'll see today clearly in the Gemara, because whether it's a pergola, whether it's a barren tree, the remaining part, now that you showed your intent that you are using it to train your grapevine, all of it becomes subordinate. All of it becomes bottle to the grapevine, and therefore we view it as if there's grapevine everywhere. And in contrast, says the Mishnah, what we already learned in the beginning of Talmud Zayin Amud Beis, that by a ilan ma'achol, that a fruit-bearing tree, of course, if you're using such a tree to train your vine under the grapevine, you may never plant. But the remaining part of the branch that's currently untrained, right? The moisar doesn't have such a isur derabanan, and you currently are allowed to plant a foreign seed under that part of the branch. That's where we left off. We're going to start today on Daf Nun Ches Amud Aleph, that the Mishnah actually brings two stories to show how we actually paskin like this din. There's going to be certain nuances that will be clarified dafka through the story, and then we're going to have something very unusual. The contrast between Ilan Michael and an Ilan Zajac is not unique to Kalayim. I would say that the most known area in Halacha where a tree is being discussed, and there's a difference between fruit-bearing or a non-fruit-bearing tree, is in the din of Bal Tashchis. No, it's the ground zero din of Bal Tashchis, even though we brought in Bal Tashchis, basically don't waste anything for no purpose. But the Torah verbalizes this lav when it comes to cutting down a fruit tree. In that context, fruit tree, cutting it down, Bal Tashchis, and a barren tree is a tree that has no fruit. We know what a barren tree means. Interestingly, here in Kalayim, there is a three-way machlokes tanoim in the Mishnah how to define the barren tree versus the fruit-bearing tree. And it's unique to Kalayim, based on what we explained, that the whole reason why we differentiate between one and the other is because one is subordinate, one is bottle, one is not bottle. Well, that's very important, because as some of the Tanaim hold, almost all fruits are so insignificant in comparison to grapes that if a person is already beginning to use an apple tree, let's say, to train vines in it, then that person would subordinate the entire apple tree to the grapevine. So it will become bottle. It will be in the category of Ilan Zajac. Amazing. As we'll see in the Mishnah, there's a three-way machlokes tanoim that we'll learn in the Mishnah. Now, what we will have in the Gemara will be a few clarifications, particularly when we speak about the entire pergola becomes subordinate. Well, what exactly does that mean? The entire length. See, a vine grows, I'm going to use the word, in the length of the pergola. That makes more sense, that all of it should become subordinate, because the vine will make it there. What about the width? The vines don't grow in the width. We will see that nevertheless, the din that the pergola becomes subordinate and one midrabanan may not plant foreign seed even under a current untrained part, that's even in the width. But there is a limitation to how far it goes to the width. And actually, even in the length, there's a limitation there as well, as we'll see in the Gemara. We're going to learn about what happens if there's two pergolas, one mamish adjacent to the other. Do we say that both of them become already bottled to the grapevine, and therefore you cannot plant foreign seed under neither of them? Or do we say it's only for this one, not for the other one? And finally, what we will have, really fascinating, will be the Gemara's quoting a Mishnah in Masechtas Kalim about a leather sack that has a hole that you fixed, whether it's susceptible to becoming tamei or not. And the three Tanoim, the same three Tanoim that argue in our Mishnah concerning the definition of an Ilan Sarak, Ilan Maichol, those same three Tanoim have an argument regarding different types of knots on the leather bag, whether it fixes it, therefore it's susceptible to becoming tamei, whether we still view it as a bag that has a hole in it, and therefore it's not susceptible to becoming tamei. And we're going to use this correlation to clarify which version of what Rav Meir said in the Masechtas Kalim is the correct version. It's going to be fascinating. And God willing, on Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis, today we'll begin already the next halacha hey, to appreciate halacha hey. I'll repeat it when we get there, but just to bekitz it, is that the fourth chapter of Masechtas Kalayim began with the din of karachas hakerem. When you have a vineyard, and in the vineyard there is a clearing, some of the vines were uprooted. Even though you have the 4 amas of space or more, nevertheless, Beis Hillel says you need to have 16 amas to be allowed to plant foreign seed inside the clearing, not the whole clearing, but in the clearing. Beis Shammai says you have to have 24 amas of cleared space inside the vineyard. In contrast, we're going to learn today in halacha hey, but Perek Daled halacha hey, what were to happen if you have a similar type of clearing, but not inside the kedem, which, as we began this chapter by saying that kedem in detail, specifically, is referring to where the vines are untrained. They are basically ragliois, they're laying on the ground. What happens when you have an udis? As an example, the simplest udis, you have a wall, and adjacent to the wall, you planted many vines. We already learned in our Mishnah that if you have only 5, you already have a din of an udis. What happens, just as an example, you planted 11 vines, and one vine, the vine in the middle was uprooted. So now you have on either side a udis, right? You have on the right 5 and the left 5. So this should be similar to karachas hakerem. And if that would have been the case, then you would not be allowed to plant only if you have 16 amas between one and the other. We do not say that. We are a lot more lenient. There has to be a shear. And there's a chiddush in that. We'll see it has to be 8 amas and 1 tefach. If you have 8 amas and 1 tefach, then in that 1 tefach in between, you will be allowed to plant foreign seed. And at least we'll see, God willing, that we'll begin halacha. Okay, Daf Nun Ches Amud Aleph. Again, we are mamish on top of the Amid. We are in the middle of the Mishnah. Again, we differentiated between the pergola, and in the pergola is also included the Ilan Sarak, the barren tree, that all of it becomes subordinate, versus the Ilan Maichol. You can never plant foreign seed under a grapevine, but only look up if there's grapevine, don't plant it. And if there's nothing over it yet, even though the vine slowly but surely will creep there, will grow there, you are currently allowed to plant a foreign seed, v'chule, and look in the Mishnah for more details. Now, says the Mishnah, Sholach Rabbi Yeshua Eitzel Rabbi Yishmael Likfar Aziz. And the case will be that Rabbi Yishmael had the field, Rabbi Yishmael had the vineyard, and he was inquiring by Rabbi Yeshua. A halachem, v'hero ugefen, Rabbi Yishmael showed Rabbi Yeshua a grapevine, shehi mudla al mixos te'eno, that was trained over part of a fig tree. What did we learn about the fig tree? That the rest of that branch will not be subordinate. So indeed, Amalei, Rabbi Shmuel told Rabbi, and Amalei, forget, Rabbi Shmuel asked Rabbi Yeshua, Ma ani lahavi zera tachas ha'maiser, may I now plant a foreign seed, whatever that would be, under the remainder of the tree? Now, guys, it goes without saying that all of the restrictions that we learned above, whether it is 6 tfachim, whether it is 4 amas, all of that stands. He wanted to plant a foreign seed under the remainder of a tree in a way that he is not in violation of any of the laws we learned until now. The additional Havamina of maybe it will be prohibited is because it was under a branch. He wanted to plant foreign seed under a branch where you can see the vine will make it there. Amalai, but Rabbi Yeshua told Rabbi Shmuel, based on the rule we learned in our Mishnah, that mutter, period. The Ilan Michael is not subordinate. Hold on. Now the hello umisham lebase Meginya, Rabbi Shmuel took Rabbi Yeshua to another area, to another village, in which Rabbi Shmuel had another plantation. And again, this is all Rabbi Shmuel asking Rabbi Yeshua, Hero Geffen, and he showed him a vine. Here, Shehi Mutla al Mixas HaKoira, that was trained over part of a beam. But let me clarify, the word beam is actually something that was connected to a sycamore tree. The Sadon shel Shikma ubay koiris harbem. So Sadon means a stump. And I know that when we say the word sycamore, we had this not that long ago. A sycamore tree here in Chazal is in reference to a certain type of inferior fig tree. Okay? And I want you to know, and that's why it's called Benois Shikma. Benois Shikma is actually the name of the figs that grow from this type of wild sycamore. It's called daughters in this context because it's not significant, because the people would plant the sycamore tree not for these figs. It was not a chush of a proper fig. They planted it for the wood. And the way they would get wood out of the trees is that every now and then they would cut it down almost to the bottom. They would only leave a stump. And from the stump, there would be a regrowth of what we call beams of wood. So that's what we are talking about. And as we will see clearly, L'kul Alma, that the Shikama is not called an Ilan Michael. Because since the intent of the person planting in generally these trees was for their wood, was not for their fruit, so it's vital, it's not a fruit tree. It was by the mixas te'ena, by the fig tree, by the proper fig tree. Rabbi Shua told them, you are allowed to plant on the voice. But here, the hero geffen shimudla al mixas hakoira, besad shel shikma by koiras harbe. And the question is whether you can plant any foreign seed under the remaining part of the tree. So Amar Loing, here it's amazing. So Rabbi Shmuel told him, Rabbi Shua again, Rabbi Shua tells Rabbi Shmuel, Tachas HaKoirazu, under this beam, not only under the part of the grapevine, under the entire beam, it's usher. Again, that's a chiddush. Because if we were to view the shikma as a fruit tree, then he would be allowed to plant it. But he's considering it a ilan srak, like we mentioned. This benois shikma, no one plants it for those inferior figs. Okay, so let's go to the other side. If we view this as an ilan srak, then you would think you're not allowed to plant it under any part of the tree. That's also not. See, that's the chiddush of the story. Under that branch that he's calling a beam, you may not plant foreign seed. But under the other beams, you are allowed to plant. Why? Because that's another nuance that we have from the story that Rabbi Yeshua held, that we perceive each and every branch as an individual tree. And really, even by the pergola, we're going to see that there is a limit to how much do we say the pergola is awesome, as we already mentioned in the introduction, in the width and even in the length. So here, since you have different offshoots from the stump, each one is a separate tree. Okay. And now here we go. Like we mentioned in the words of introduction, when it comes to the din of Bal Tashchis, and a person is Pashut Chayiv Malkus, you're Chayiv Malkus for cutting down any fruit tree. A Ilan Sirak in that context means a tree that is not producing fruit, period. Not so in our case. Here, according to some, it will be different. And why? Because the whole reason why we differentiate between a Ilan Michael and an Ilan Sirak, we're going with this approach because the owner's intent by training a vine is, if it's a fruit tree, he will not subordinate it. He will not be mavatal it. If it's a non-fruit tree, he will be mavatal it. Now go and you'll see that actually there are certain, according to some Tanoim, certain trees, they're fruits which are good in themselves, but in comparison to grapes, they are so inferior that he will subordinate. So it should have a din of an ilan sarak. And indeed, ezu ilan sarak. So the Tanakama says, like in any other case, what are you talking about? Kol she'eino isa peiros. The barren tree is a tree that makes no fruit. Now, interestingly, even according to the Tanakama, even according to the Chachamim, we can say, even according to the Chachamim, the shikma is considered the ilan sarak. Well, there is a limitation because it does make peiros, but it was not planted for the peiros. So let me just add that. In the opposite direction, it's amazing, and this is only for dine kalayim. Hakoil ilan sarak, all trees, apple trees, orange trees, pear trees, mamish, all tree-producing trees, fruit-producing trees, are for this halach of kalayim called ilan sarak. They're called barren trees. So hold a second. So what's the fruit tree? Only 2 trees. Zayis te'ena, which happens to be one of the stories, the first story in Kfar Aziz. So a olive and a fig, they are significant even in comparison to the grapevine. All other fruits in comparison to the grapevine are insignificant. And once the owner showed that he's using, let's say, his apple tree to train the grapes, the owner wants for the grape to go on the whole branch. And let me add another detail. And again, I'm looking forward to going to a vineyard. And we're gonna ask all of these things to the big manager that's supposed to be a big maven. According to Chazal, when you train a grapevine on a tree, it's going to actually take some of the moisture of that branch. And it's going to make the fruits that are growing there inferior. The fact that the owner allowed for his, let's say, apple tree to be used as a pergola, as a trellis for the grapevine, what is the owner saying? Owner saying is that I want my grapes more than I want my apples. He's losing, and he's still doing it. So he's being mavatal it. If he's being mavatal it, it's called an ilan. Now, do we say this across the board, even according to Rav Meir? No, we don't say that. Rav Meir agrees that the olive and the fig, those fruits, are so objectively chashuv. Let me word it that way. Even though the owner is putting it on the olive tree, doesn't matter. But l'daitoi. It's amazing. Some of it is about your intent, and some of it is objective. So we have like these classes. So we have, according to a nudin, that a zayis and a te'ena are uniquely chashuv. Are you going to say it's from the Shivas Haminim? It's not about the Shivas Haminim, because then you would have a D-mind. You would have other. It's amazing. Okay, right. So we have the Tanakama, same definition as always. Rav Meir is mamish min hakotzer lakotzer. What's fruit trees? Only 2 trees. Olives and figs. Go figure. And Rabbi Yossi Omer, here we go. Kol she'ein kamoyu noitim sadai shaleimais. It gives a whole different criteria. He says like this: when trees are considered significant, and it is subjective to its owner, something that I will consider a significant fruit tree will be a type of tree that I will plant my entire orchard with. Something that I will not consider for me to be a mamish chashav, a fruit tree, I'm not going to use an entire orchard for it. I'll plant one here and one there. In other words, I'll use my land for something that I consider more important, and then I'll fill in the empty spaces with fruit trees. Don't forget, we keep on repeating it, but there is no issue of kalayim when it comes to trees and seeds. When it comes even to trees and grapevine, there is no issue. I mean, you're allowed to plant in Eretz Yisrael, even on a rabbinic level. If you have a wheat field, you can plant in your wheat field. You can plant an apple tree. You got no problem with that. So the Rabbi Yossi says, if the owner will not use his land, his orchard, to fill it up with this specific type of tree, that means he doesn't find it that chashuv. So it's subjective. And hareze ilan sirak, or in the opposite, it doesn't mean that I will always do it, but if I will at times fill up my orchard, I'm planting pears. Yeah? If I'm a person that will use my land for pears, that means for me, pears are chashuv. If I have the attitude, I'm not going to use my whole land for pears. You want some pears? Okay, squeeze one here, squeeze one there. So it's subjective to the owner, and then by all about him making it subordinate. L'chatchila, it's not that chashuv, and on top of it, he's using it as a trellis. The whole thing is batul. If for him it's a chashuv a tree, even though he's using it as a trellis. Here we say, wherever the vine is on, underneath it you can't, but in the rest of the branch you are allowed as long as the vine does not grow there as of yet. Okay. Says the Gemara. Let's begin. As we mentioned in the words of introduction, that it goes without saying. Let me go back to the case of the pergola, right? Apif yorois. That's how you say it in the Holy Tongue. You can't say that if I plant cave on one vine on the pergola that's 20 amas by 20 amas, can't be that the whole pergola becomes usher. Why not? Because one vine, let me tell you, eventually it's going to grow in one direction. I'm going to use the word length. That I get. And by the way, even in the length, there's a limit. We'll see soon. But it doesn't grow in the width. The vine doesn't grow like it grows straight, more or less. So we don't say that we don't care about the width. We say is that there is a limited amount of width under which you cannot plant, but beyond that, you could plant. So let's begin with the width, then we'll go with the length. What's the width is a chiddush. You might have thought it Bachlal doesn't include the width. It does to a limit. Says the Gemara, Chizkiya Amar, Mishloisha va'ad arba, he must nisom. Chiddush of the Mishnah is that you may not plant under the untrained part of the pergola, to the right and to the left of the vine, up until 4 tfachim. Arba'ah. Now, why is he saying 3 to 4 tfachim? Just say 4 tfachim.
Is there only one vine on the pergola?
Well, even if there's 2. So from the outer sides, you have to go beyond it, machmir, from 3 to 4. Just say 4. No. Because within 3, because of the din of lavud, we don't even have to say you can't plant underneath it. To say that you cannot plant even in the width from either side within 3 tfachim, that's obvious. Of course, you may not. What Chizkiya is saying is that physically the vine is not growing, it won't even grow 3 tfachim. But I get it, under 3 tfachim is like love. We're going to go another whole tefach to each side. Bottom line is that wherever the vine ends, let's say the vine is thick a tefach. From the edge of the right side, measure 4 tfachim. Even though the vine, no matter how far it will go, will never go into the width that much. Doesn't matter. You may not plant underneath in that pergola. Same thing with the left. On either side, 4 tfachim. In other words, with less than 3, of course you can't. Chiddush is that we are being machmer. We are extending it until 4 tfachim. You have to measure 4 tfachim. Arba nachasu. Nachas means it's good. Once you already measure and you're not planting any foreign seed, forget about under the vine, of course not. You're not planting it, not to the right, nor to the left in the width. Within 4 tfachim, we'll see how far length. We'll see. There's also a limit. Nachas means it's good. Beyond that, you could plant. So that's Chizkiya. Now, and no one is debating. Now the Gemara is saying, hold on. I get it. When it comes to the length, what's 4 tfachim? Of course not. It's gonna go. It's growing. The Gemara says it's also not forever. If the pergola is 20 miles long, we can't plant anywhere in the pergola. It can be, but there is a machloikis. How far in the length? Ad heichan, like this. Rabbi Yaakov bar Idi in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says ad arba amos. In other words, 4 amas beyond the trained grapevine will be a place in which you are allowed to plant. And don't come and tell me, what are you talking about? 4 amas is anyways a limitation. No, 4 amas, when it comes to a kedem or to an aris, is either from the grapevine or from the wall, not from the edge of the vine. Here we're saying that from the edge of the vine, you have to go another 4 amas. That's a big chumrah. But that's the rabbinic law of our Mishnah. Rabbi Acha bar Chinana, in the name of Shimon ben Lakish, knows a machlekes what Shimon ben Lakish says. At 6 amas. Interesting share. 6 amas. In other words, this subordination is not unlimited. There is a shear to the Isser. In the length, 4 or 6. In the width, 4 tfachim on each side, beyond which you are allowed to plant. Now, Vaiter Amaisa says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Manon, that at one time, Oslisli Kaserin, I went to Kaseria. Ushmo is Rabbi Oishaya Bar Shammai, is saying in the name of Rabbi Yitzchak ben Lazar regarding our din of a pergola, that if you have two separate trellises, two separate pergolas, one mamish near the other, but they're separate structures, two separate ones, Kevin is already thinking of making a big painting, then is mutter. You are allowed to plant under the there's a chiddush here. You know why? Because let's go to the share we said. Let's go even with the 4 amas. Let's say this pergola is only 3 amas. Then in the length, you cannot plant under this pergola. I got it. The vine, when it comes to the end, will find the other one. The vine will go into the other one. So you can argue, well, let's go with the rule of until 4 amas or until 6 amas. We don't say that. It's only this pergola. Even if the grapevine will eventually reach the second one, it's a separate one. And until it touches that one is completely permitted. That is Rabbi Mana. However, Amar Rabbi Chinana, that Shkoyach, I found the Braisa that says the opposite. Now we're going to quote the Braisa on Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis. Here he's not telling you the words of the Braisa, he's telling you the bottom line, the halach. But Vitana Yupali, yeah, very nice. I found the Braisa that argues with Rabbi, which really means Rav Mana and Amaida cannot argue with the Tana. What is it? What's the message of the Braisa? That im hoyo darkei lefaseya, like we mentioned, if the 2 pergolas are so near each other, you have to be a maven in the vines. And you know that when the vine will come to the edge of the one that it's on, it will somehow, in Yiddish, krich over, it's going to wiggle its way and find the other one. If it's going to eventually reach the other one, then already now the other one has this rabbinic restriction that also you may not plant foreign seed underneath it. That's the message of the Braisa. Turning to Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis, now let's read the words of the Braisa. The Tani Kain, indeed, that what here are the words. Rab Shimon ben Elazar Omer, im hoya darke lefaseya ben pifoy lepifoy. If this type of vine will be able to reach from one to the other, it has to do with the distance of the pergolas. It has to do with the type of vine, I'm sure. Then kepifoy echatu. And bottom line is that now that we found the Braisa, that's the way at least we learn. The Amoira, Rabbi Mana, will not argue. He never heard it, but if he would have heard it, he would have retracted his opinion. Okay. And now here again, guys, just remember that in our Mishnah, we had a 3-way machlokes tanoim as to what's the definition by Kalayim for Elon Michael, so that, or the opposite. It goes, same coin, 2 opposite sides. Elon Sirak, according to the Chachamim, is the way it's always defined. If it doesn't produce fruits, it's called barren. If it produces fruits, it's called the Elon Michael, with the parentheses, with the sycamore. Okay. Rav Meir says the opposite. Everything is considered a Elon Sirak. Every tree is barren. The only 2 trees that are exempt from the stringency, midrabanan, is olives and figs. That means, of course, under the grapevine, you may never plant foreign seed. But the moiser of that same branch, you could plant. And then you have Rabbi Yossi, that it's subjective to the owner. Tanakama, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi. Now go figure how gavaldik it is to compare one case to the other. So let's begin. Let's read it inside, and we're going to go to a Mishnah that we have in Masech Pesach. Says the Gemara. Hamad l'sagef. You trained a grapevine. And yes, I'll mix us Ilan Michael. And there we say that the rest of the branch is not subordinate. Oh, before we go to the Kalim, what's the logic? I know we keep on using the word subordinate, but we get it from this Gemara. So, frag the Gemara, ma bein Ilan Sarak, ma bein Ilan Michael. What's the logic to differentiate between the barren and the fruit bearing? So, the Gemara's words are Adam mevatel Ilan Sarak al gaba gafnai. It has to do, Chabra, with the intent of the owner. The fact that the owner of the vine and of the tree is using the tree to train the grapevine. And like we mentioned, it's not stam using the tree. It will actually lower the quality of the fruits of that branch because the grapevine does take some of the moisture out. The fact that he's willing to give up the quality of the apple for the grape is a raya. Is a raya that you would say that, right?
Moisture from soil or from the air?
From everything, including from the branch. In other words, you're making the tree subordinate. You're downgrading the quality of the tree. And you don't care. You care about the grape. That explains the Ilan Sadak. You are subordinating it. You're looking at your tree that's barren as sticks, Kavan, as a trellis, as a pergola. You're looking at it. You're viewing your property that way. You're mavatal it. You downgrade it. But even according to the Tanakama, even if it's apples, and even though it's going to downgrade the apples, but still you want the apples. You're not being mavatal it. There ain't other mavatal ilan Michael agabagafnoi. Even though it impairs the fruit, you're not mavatal it. You're not mavatal it, and therefore it remains as its own entity. It's called an ilan Michael. It's about your intent. And if there's no grapevine there yet, and you can even argue, or maybe you can argue more, you don't want it to go there. I put it on this edge of the branch. The apples here will be shvach, but I'm not gonna let it go further. What you did, you did. What you didn't do, you didn't do. In other words, you don't want it to be there. So because of the we don't know your intent, or we're presuming that your intent is not to be mavatal, it's not subordinate. Now your intent is extremely important for the following topic. So now says the Gemara, Tamon Tanin, and we learned over there. I want people to just understand that when they wrote the Gemara, until now, they never wrote in the Gemara that Amoraim Rabbi Yechanan didn't write where. He says, we learned over there, and he begins to quote a Mishnah. You know what was the expectation? When you begin to read the words, you know exactly where it's from. Just understand it. And that expectation is being lived up to many Jews today, in our generation. Many people today are not familiar with all of this. You have to just chazer a lot. Someone showed me a clip of what's called Shasid. There's a group in Eretz Yisrael, and they have chevra from America also. I think they learn 8 daf a day, or Gemara Rashi Tosfos. And they have a system of reviewing it. They review it so much that after 2 or 3 years, these people have at the tips of their tongues the whole Gemara Rashi Tosfos of the whole Shas. It's so amazing. And this is not people that have photographic memories. This is people that have the discipline of mamish learning many hours a day with a good seder, with chavedim, works. And then you begin quoting Kol Chamasais Terudas Tohiris. Where does it say? They'll know right away. Anyways, how do I know? Because we're looking at the Noisei Kalim, and this is the Mishnah Masechtas Kalim. Now, the basic rule we're familiar with. Very good. What's the basic rule? The basic rule is that when you have the example that we are using here for a keli is chamasoi, so the plural, that's leather flasks. So you have these pouches that are made out of leather, and they are meant to hold wine or liquid. That's a great picture. Now, the rule of all kelim are that if they become damaged, let me give you a general approach in a way where the function for which it was made cannot be brought to fruition. There's a hole in it then you can't use it. Then it's not a keli, and it's not susceptible to becoming tummy. Actually, if it became tummy, it loses its tummy. Now, there's also other shiurim, whether it's not functional or the hole has to be kemoitzi rimen, kemoitzi zayis. We learned that, and we're going to review it many times. But the general idea is that if it becomes damaged to a certain degree, it's no longer.
We had that about all utensils, didn't we?
All utensils. An example. The case that we're learning over here is that a guy has this leather flask, and it got perforated, and they went ahead and they tied the hole closed. Now, the real way of fixing it is stitching it. Once you stitched it closed, for sure it's a cable. Nothing to talk about. But we're going to see in a moment there are 2 types of knots. There's the regular knot, and then there's the Arabian, the Arabim knot. Ooh, that's a much better knot. So the Mishnah says, Kol chamasais tsururos. If this flask that has a hole was now knotted to fix it, it was knotted closed, the knot is not going to make this into a bona fide keli again. We don't view the knot as, now it's fixed. We don't view it that way. With the exception, says the Tanakama Chutz Mishel Arvim, that the type of knots that the Arabs make are very difficult to open. They make a better type of knot. So their knot that's difficult to open will learn pshat that way. will be viewed halachically as, now the hole is sealed. Now that the hole is sealed, this flask goes back to becoming susceptible to becoming tummy. That's the Tanakama. Guys, it's mamish. Listen, you're going to think, what are we talking? What's the shidduch? You'll see in a moment. Rav Meir, see Tanakama, Rav Meir, Rabbi Yosef. Rav Meir says it's not about the type of knot, but Suroir Hasha'ah. It has to do with the intent. That's the way we'll learn. With the intent of the owner who made the knot. If the intent was for it only to be there temporarily, then it's not called fixed. It's not called sealed. It's about the intention of the person, the owner who made the knot. If the intent was to leave that knot there forever, then it returns to the status of a keli, and therefore to meyos, which would normally mean it's now back to being susceptible to becoming tummy. So it's not about the type of knot. It's not about the Arabic knot or a regular knot. It's about the intent of the owner. Now, these words and our explanation of Rav Meir, he doesn't say the word intent. He says Shorei Hashah. It's whether it's temporary or permanent. And we're saying, what do you mean temporary or permanent? That's to do with the intent. That's one version of what Rav Meir said. And now the Gemara points out that we had a period of time where people that were reviewing this had an opposite version of Rav Meir. And we are now going to determine, the Gemara will determine what girsa, what text, what version is the correct version. What's the other version? Is Tanoim Tanei Mechalif. Other Tanoim read the opposite. Wow. What would the opposite mean? That Rav Meir says, let me tell you, that if the flasks were knotted permanently, they remain tahar. They remain tahar. If they were only knotted temporarily, now they're susceptible to becoming tummy. Now, you would argue, how would that even make sense? How would that even make sense? Look inside the Rash Shadilio on the right column, 5 lines from the bottom. Tanoi Tani Machlif. In other words, the Divrei Rav Meir. There are other Tanoim that they have the opposite of what Rabbi Meir said. Vigorsin, their version is, Rabbi Meir says, if the owner knotted it in a way where he won't leave that knot there forever, then it's Tameos. But it's but if he knotted there for the knot to remain, to seal it, that's it. He resolved it, then Tahoiros. Now, what would be the logic? Like, it doesn't even make sense. The Gemara is going to say this is the wrong version, but how can we even have that version? So says that Asher Elio, and they would explain the rationale behind such a version. He's giving an example that if a person had a pillow, just as an example, and they changed the pillow permanently, they made it into another utensil. They made it into a sheet. In other words, they undid the pillowcase in a way where now it's a sheet. Now it's a new keli. Now let me just add another little nuance, and that has to do with everything. Whenever we're going to learn these dinim of Tum and Tara, Kevan, there are 2 issues. Issue number 1 is it was Tameh, and now it's again susceptible to becoming Tameh. There's another way of approaching all of this. The old keli was Tameh. Midarabanan, when you fix the old keli, midarabanan, sometimes it returns. The Chachamim made that gezeda because they were afraid that a person will think that just like when it's broken and it's fixed, it becomes tahar right away. Even though it's fixed, it's susceptible, but it's tahar right away. But then when they take it to the mikvah, they're going to say it's tahar right away, and they're not going to wait until nightfall. We learned this together. So they said, other than metal that's melted down, the old tumah does not come back. The old midrabanan, the old tumah comes back. But the old tumah only comes back if the old keli came back. You had a pot, the pot was perforated, you fixed the pot, now the old tumah comes back midrabanan. But if you have a pillowcase and you made it into a sheet, the old tumah does not come back. It's a new keli. And that's somehow going to be the rationale behind this opposite version, that if you fixed it in a way where it's permanent, we view this as a brand new flask. Right now it started. If you fixed it temporarily, which means you're going to undo the knot and you're going to stitch it up, when you stitch it up, it's going to be exactly the way it was. Then midrabanan, maybe the old tuma comes back. I'm saying that might be what he's saying. It doesn't matter.
Are we going to
Is,
compare this to a tree that has no fruit and will have fruit?
No, it's just a different kalim. You know, it's when do we say that midrabanan, the old tuma comes back? Only if the old keli came back. But let's go weiter. The point is there were two versions. What did Rav Meir say? And Rabbi Yaakov Baracha b'shem Rabbi Yasa, before our discussion, he said Kimas Nisan. He says the latter version is not accurate. The correct version is the one that we read. And I'll read the words. That's Seroid Hasha Tohoidois and Seroid Oilam Tameyots. And even though Rabbi Yaakov Baracha b'shem Rabbi Yasa already established the right version, the Gemara wants us to remember a siman. We're giving us mnemonics of memory to remember the right siman. So Amar Rabbi Yudan, let me tell you a way to remember how Rabbi Yasa is correct. That the first girsa is the right girsa. How do we remember that? This is a bomb. Simana the Kalim Kalayim. Kalim Kalayim are almost the same word. And everyone knew in Mesechtas Kalayim our Mishnah. What did our Mishnah say? Let me go back to what the Gemara just established. That Rab Meir's opinion, how can Rab Meir say that an apple tree is not a fruit tree? How is it not a fruit tree? Because it's not about the objective status of the tree. By Balkashkis, is it a fruit tree? It'll be Chayiv Malkus. If you uproot a barren tree, you won't be Chayiv Malkus. There's no law of Balkashkis explicit. When it comes to Dinei Kalayim, the way we learned our mission, the way the Gemara said, is that if the Adam is Mavatl, it's about intent. So if the logic of Rav Meir by Kalayim, it's about intent, are you making it subordinate or not? That logic will only fit in the Mesechtas Kalim if you follow the first girsa. Why is it tahar? Because the owner who tied it does not plan to leave it there. Makes sense. If his intent is not to leave the knot there permanently, so it's not fixed, it's not sealed. If it's not sealed, it's perforated. If it's perforated, it's not a keli. It can be the same knot. Same exact knot. It's about the intent of the owner. So using the logic behind Rav Meir here and making his shita be dependent on that same logic will make you accept the girsa of Tzeroid Hashato Hoirois and not the opposite. That's called Simana the Kalim Kilayim. This is amazing. And now the Gemara says, Uma bein Tzeroid Lemad Sham, the Veda Rabbi Yomrei. What will be the difference? Explaining it's about intent. The Veda Rabbi Yomrei that Tzeroid Oilam Sarachituch. Tzeroid Sha'en Sarachituch. I take that back. The way we're going to learn, I'm sorry. The law came. I got it. The law came because I skipped the word. The law came means the imlay came. Because if you don't say this logic, then there's no other way to understand Rav Meir. So this is like conclusive. Because ma being what difference? It has to be your intent. Oh, so that's good. Says the Gemara. That's not a proof. There would be another way of understanding it. What would be the other way? That in Kalim, Rav Meir Shita is not contingent on intent. It's contingent on the actual mitzias. It's contingent on reality, which would mean that it's not. That's where we are rejecting that ayah. When you make a knot in a permanent way, let's remove the intent. When you make a permanent knot, the only way to get rid of the knot, which is something that you would want to do if you'd want to stitch it up, is you have to make an effort to get rid of the knot. And when you make a knot so good, the only way to get rid of the knot is by cutting it. That means you have to do an action to be mavatal the action that you did. So Shah, a temporary knot, ain't a tzarachituk. So therefore, one might have argued that in Masechtas Kalim, it's not about intent. If it's not about intent, it's about whether the knot is permanent, objectively, whether the knot is temporary, objectively. Very much by Shabbos, by the din of making knots. Very much by Shabbos, there is also both. There is objective.
Temporarily does require.
By Shabbos, temporary means you plan to leave it there. Temporary, you plan to take it out. But there's by Shabbos is also objective. Like many people, we learned this in the Gemara. The Chachamim, they didn't want to waste time with untying the shoes. They would have what we have. We have a tie and a bow. That's the typical. They wouldn't touch it the whole week. They would slip the shoes in and out. So you would argue maybe they're not allowed to do it on Shabbos. We had that sugya, but we don't pass in that way because since objectively it's a knot that with one hand can be undone.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter your intent. So I'm just saying by Shabbos here also we're saying that there were two ways of understanding Rav Meir, but if Rav Meir is to be understood in Masechtas Kelim about intent, which would make it mamish Kelim Kalayim, that would bevadai back up Rabbi Yasa, who says the first version is correct. This is amazing. I wish we would have gone further, but we didn't, and it's already 7 o'clock. So God willing, we're going to start off next year and so with some catch up on Daf Nun Chesed Beis by Halacha Dalet.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi.